And then the country just turned around and elected a man who, again, broke the record for the oldest person to become president. And 9 months in, I got to say, the guy doesn't look great. He's got a reoccurring bruise on his hand. He's constantly trying to cover up with makeup. He's got severely swollen ankles, which the White House attributes to a very common condition among senior citizens. But it's more than that. Mentally, the guy seems off. He's constantly drifting off during meetings, unable to properly understand questions from reporters, rambling even more than he did during his first term. And that problem is compounded by the fact the administration is among the least transparent we've ever seen. Just take a look at this official White House announcement about the president's schedule just today. Quote, on Friday morning, President Trump will visit Walter Reed Medical Center for a planned meeting and remarks with the troops. While there, President Trump will stop by for his routine yearly checkup. He will then return to the White House. President Trump is considering going to the Middle East shortly thereafter. Wait, what was that part sandwiched in the middle there? Oh, the president's going to talk to the troops at Walter Reed and, hey, while you're there, might as well pop in for the yearly checkup. But here's the thing, Donald Trump already had his annual checkup. It was in April. Here's the official White House readout from that visit, the one where they said he's 6'2" and 224 pounds, which is, by the way, the same height and weight as Patrick Mahomes. But if you're concerned about the president needing 2 physicals in 1 year, have no fear. Trump says he's doing just fine.
Process of destroying that infrastructure for everyone else. Joining us now is former FDA Commissioner Dr. David Kessler. He has a new book that is coming out tomorrow. It's called Diet, Drugs, and Dopamine, the New Science of Achieving a Healthy Weight. Dr. David Kessler, congratulations on the book. First of all, let me say, I brought home the galley when I last saw you. I read it. My partner read it. We then handed it to a neighbor who also wanted to read it. I really appreciate you writing this, particularly given your expertise in this field and so many others. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
So first, let me just ask you if I accurately represented your take on the president's medical report and why you think it's worth understanding in terms of how he is governing, how he is managing health policy in the country.
You know, weight is such a fraught subject. There's so much stigma attached to it. But it's not about weight. It's really about health. You got the facts exactly right. Let's just go through them. The president had a cardiac scan that showed some plaque buildup, and they put him on 2 lipid-lowering drugs. What no one has said about those 2 lipid-lowering drugs is what those are called is intensive lipid-lowering therapy, ezetimibe, rosuvastatin, and they're working. His lipids dropped dramatically from 143 to 51. I mean, that reduces the risk of heart attack. That prolongs life. But the key, as you said, is the science of those drugs was worked out by research funded by the NIH and shepherded by the FDA. The president is destroying those institutions that gave birth to the drugs that are benefiting him.
I think we tend to think of drug development as the province of private companies, of pharmaceutical companies. Can you explain to an audience that may not understand the sort of weight of what you just said? Can you talk about the federal government's role in researching and creating drugs and getting them to the American people, the part of it that can't happen without the U.S. government?
So a drug has to work on a certain target. And while the drug companies will chemically synthesize the drug and do the clinical trials, the identification of that target, the receptor, I mean, that was done by research funded. It was Nobel Prize winning work by Brown and Goldstein, right? They identified, you know, through NIH funding, because no drug company has that capability. They identified the receptors that the drugs can work on. It was also true for the current weight loss drugs. The GLP-1 drugs were done by, you know, a number of research labs, including, you know, a great research lab up at Harvard at Mass General Hospital.
When you were last here, Dr. Kessler, you said something that got a very large response from our audience. People continue to ask me about it. You talked about when President Trump himself had COVID during his first term, and he was very ill. We learned later just how seriously ill he was. And you talked about his treatment, a very successful treatment at Walter Reed when he received monoclonal antibody infusions.
Katie, I don't know if I'm going to have a more satisfying answer today than I did yesterday. What I will say is that obviously we want to ask the president those questions. I'd like to ask him that question. I think other reporters in the White House press corps would love to ask him that question, which is why does he appear to be whipping against the vote next week, tried to get names taken off the discharge petition, tried to get House Republicans to take their name off of it? Why not be willing to release it? And no one has been able to ask him that directly, especially with cameras on in the public view. And when White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was asked very directly about some of the substance of these emails the other day, she was asked by CBS reporter WOR槤JE, did the president ever spend hours at Jeffrey Epstein's house with a victim? And she didn't answer it. So they're not necessarily engaging on the substance of the emails. They're not engaging on why the president is trying to divert and distract by saying he's going to now direct the Justice Department, ask the Justice Department, the Attorney General, to investigate others who he knows may have had some relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. But obviously the president had a long relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. That's well documented. So despite eventually saying that he kicked him out of his club years later, he had a relationship with him, as all those videos and those emails show, and apparently does not want these to be released.
There's a new survivor's letter out to members of Congress, Leanne, and here's what it says. You have the ability to vote to release the Epstein files and with it deliver a promise the American people have awaited for far too long. We implore you to do so. Several weeks ago, when a few brave survivors stood before you and recounted their harrowing stories, many of you were shaken to your core. We urge you, when you cast your vote, please do not forget the horror you felt that day. There is no middle ground here. There is no hiding behind party affiliation. The testimonies you heard are just a fraction of the unimaginable suffering endured by more than 1,000 victims alike. How much influence does a letter like this have? What do you expect to happen in Congress, Leanne?
So Speaker Mike Johnson said that the vote he would bring it up this coming week. So we do expect that to happen unless he changes his mind, which of course he could. But it will have to come up soon, regardless. And from what I'm hearing from my Republican sources is that there are going to be a lot of Republicans, perhaps dozens, who in fact vote for the release of these files. For many, it is politically untenable. For others, they think that it's just the right thing to do. And the pressure is too great for them to ignore it when they have the choice in front of them. And so I do expect, based on what Republicans are telling me, that this vote will pass overwhelmingly. That doesn't mean that these files are going to be released imminently. It, of course, has to go to the Senate next. And then if it passes the Senate, then it's up to the president. Does he veto it or does he sign it? And that could be a very interesting decision, Katie.
Yeah, I mean, it could definitely be interesting and potentially damaging. I mean, Susan, I'm so happy you brought up what happened in the 90s with the Ken Starr investigation and where it started and where it led, because I think we do forget that once it's like a snowball rolling down a hill. You know, it really starts to gather steam. It gets bigger and it becomes uncontrollable. Do you foresee this potentially happening here?
Well, look, I think, frankly, it's already happened, arguably. Remember that this has been a scandal that has it crept up in different incarnations from the beginning of Trump's time in public life. It actually claimed one of his first-term cabinet secretaries was forced to resign, Alex Acosta, because he had signed off on what later, people came to view as a sweetheart plea deal for Jeffrey Epstein when Acosta had been a prosecutor in Florida. Donald Trump was very defensive, asked repeatedly about Epstein in 2019 after he died. In fact, interestingly, in terms of how the White House is handling this now, right, it's often there's underlying conduct in a scandal, and then there's the question of the handling it or the cover up or the associated spin-off investigations. Well, in this case, The White House this week, Caroline Leavitt, claimed that Donald Trump fell out with Jeffrey Epstein and that he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago because he was, quote unquote, a pedophile. Well, in 2019, Donald Trump was asked very directly by reporters, did you have any suspicions at all about Jeffrey Epstein? Did you know about him? And Donald Trump looked in their face and said, absolutely no. No, I had no suspicions at all. So explain to me, and I wish someone would ask Caroline Leavitt, how is it possible that Donald Trump kicked Jeffrey Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago for being a pedophile if he had no suspicions at all about him being a pedophile? So this is the kind of example where White Houses dig in to trouble. And there's an abuse of power that's already occurring. Trump today is demanding an investigation by his Justice Department of Democrats on the basis of, no specific allegation of illegal activity, simply to take attention.
Well, it's interesting because what you're seeing are a bunch of people who have email exchanges or relationships with Jeffrey Epstein. And I guess the logic here is that everybody who's been talking to him, if they have a D in front of their name, must be implicated in some way, must have done something wrong. But I, who also had a relationship with him, I am completely clean. That's a hard pill to swallow. I know there are a lot of Trump allies out there who are trying to do that and trying to make this look like Donald Trump is a savior here, or this exonerates him in some way. But it's difficult logic, is how I'll put it, Susan.
Yeah, it's not a circle that you can square right away. I think it's really important, again, that it's MAGA itself that is fueling this political dilemma for the president.
Trump is sick. He's hiding away. He's not mentally healthy. He's not physically healthy. We've been talking about it for weeks and months as the Epstein scandal has built up. Because remember, there's this recent bump, but there's also been, the scandal's been building up since at least the springtime. And in that time, Trump's been getting sicker. And he's been hiding that fact. And he's been trying to downplay that fact whenever he's been forced to admit some of it. For example, Trump, he's got a small leg issue. Well, really, that's a big issue, and really, that's a heart issue, and that could cause a stroke, and many people felt Trump has already suffered a stroke, given how his face just randomly droops sometime, in addition to the fact that people feel he has major cognitive decline. And this Epstein stuff isn't going to help. Again, as noted, the job of president is stressful enough as it is, and that's before you feel your life has been ruined by these new leaks. Every day, every hour, something new. It was bad enough a few months ago. And it was bad enough a few weeks ago. And it was bad enough a few days ago. And it was bad enough a few hours ago. And and there's always something new. New rumors that are astoundingly bad for Trump if they're even somewhat true. I don't want to talk about all of them right now because some of them haven't been confirmed. But it gets really bad. Really, really bad. And so Donald is canceling all of his events. He's hiding away. And I do think it's a dual thing. He wants to hide away from this Epstein scandal. But he also, I think, is too sick to really be out there and fully defend himself like he might have been even just a couple years ago. Donald is a broken man with a broken legacy. And he's too old, too sick, too frail, too demented to even mount a defense.